This is Reporter Room with Jessica Della Davies.
Hello, friends. Come on in. Come on in. Right before I was going to go live, I had all kinds of technical issues. I lost my microphone, I lost my camera, but I think everything is working now. Let me know. Just a quick, can you hear me okay? Just a quick sound check before uh, I get started. Just a quick yes or no would be awesome. Thank you to our mods, Enjas, Donna Bravo, and Michael. Thank you so much for joining me today. Welcome, Marianne and Dee. Can you guys hear me? Yes? Oh, thank you so much. Okay. Welcome. This is our head mod, Enjas, our other head mod, Mike, and Wicked's telling me loud and clear. Okay, you guys are the best. Thank you so much for letting me know. I just didn't want to go live and then not have any sound. Okay, we have a lot of stuff to unpack. Welcome. My name is Jessica Della Davies. I'm an investigative journalist, and my job is to investigate crimes, crime scenes, and potential suspects, and share with you how to do the same thing. If you haven't subscribed to Reporter in the Reporter Room family, it's free and it helps me out a lot. Like, share, subscribe, and let's get started. So today we're going to be talking about Bryan Kohberger and a future target that he had picked out, how WSU failed its students, BK's bizarre behavior behind bars, BK's spying on law enforcement, and BK's injuries. What is this really why they stopped Michael and Bryan Kohberger twice in Indiana on their way from Pullman, Washington to Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. And we're going to talk about Bryan Kohberger's potential future appeals. How will this all work? So let's go ahead and get started. So it does appear. So come on in. Tell me where you are from. You can tell me what state. You can tell me what country. You can tell me what continent, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. So let's start by talking about Bryan Kohberger's future targets. And then we're going to get into how WSU failed its students, Bryan Kohberger's bizarre behavior behind bars, BK's spying on police, and Bryan Kohberger's injuries. And was this the real reason that we had 2 traffic stops in Indiana when Michael and Bryan Kohberger were traveling across the country? I also want to let you know, after this, I'm going to do a live stream on the Chris Watts case and Lily and Jack Sullivan. So let's go ahead and get started. So Bryan Kohberger did appear to have more targets, and a lot of people are wondering if this was going to be his next victim. Let me show you. Okay, so my sourcing on this, let me take this down for a second, put this up. Okay. So my sourcing on this is CNN. And they have reported out, let me put this. So what they are saying is that BK did appear to have more targets. There was a woman in class where Bryan Kohberger was a teacher's assistant in the fall of 2022. And she said that she saw several photos. So this is a WSU student, not a University of Idaho student. So Bryan Kohberger was her teacher's assistant in the fall of 2022. And she said, and imagine how she felt, that there were several photos of her and her friends on his phone. How did they find out? The Dateline NBC special showed photographs of her and her friends on Bryan Kohberger's phone, according to newly released documents. And she said she had never even spoken to BK, but that he sat near her when he attended class, which she said was rare. She said that she thinks that the photos she saw in the TV special were downloaded from her Instagram account, which was public back in 2022. So let's talk about Bryan Kohberger's creepy behavior behind bars, and then we're going to discuss how WSU failed its students, how Bryan Kohberger was spying on law enforcement, BK's injuries. Was this the real reason? What was the real reason for those 2 Indiana traffic stops with Michael Kohberger, and Bryan Kohberger's future appeal, what will happen if he appeals. So Bryan Kohberger is now behind bars, and we now are learning in documents released on Wednesday that shed light on Bryan Kohberger's time in the Latah County Jail. Now, we had heard about the Pennsylvania County Jail, and we had heard that he was taunting the guards and had some altercations. The warden denied it, but another inmate said this. So, but here, this also comes from another inmate. So this is after Bryan Kohberger was arrested. He took long showers. He barely slept. This is according to an inmate who was housed next to him in one document. And he said that BK would wash his hands dozens of times a day. This doesn't surprise me. This does line up with what we know, which is that we've heard that he's had OCD and that he would spend up to an hour in the shower. Now, I bet in prison, he's not getting an hour to shower. Probably doesn't want to pick up the soap either. So according to the investigation documents, he would spend almost all of his nights awake. Now, this does not surprise me that his sleep-wake cycle would have been impacted. Remember, Bryan Kohberger was allegedly going to the 1122 King Road home. His phone pinged, according to the FBI, around the residence 23 times. So, and this was all in the late hours around between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. So for most of them, with the exception being the one time it pinged on the day of the crimes at just after 9 a.m. So he said that Bryan Kohberger would spend all of his days nap during the day, and then he would stay awake all night, and that he would move around during the night. So I would imagine this would be somewhat disruptive to other people who were housed in the jail with him in Latah County. So he said that this really annoyed his neighboring inmate. Then that BK, he also said, spoke to his mother, Mary Ann, for hours every day via video call while in jail. Now, that is according to court documents. So let's talk about what will happen with Bryan Kohberger's future appeals. And then we're going to discuss how WSU failed its students, Bryan Kohberger spying on police, BK's injuries, and was this the real reason for those 2 traffic stops in Indiana? And we're going to talk about those in just a moment, so please stay with me. But let's talk about this plea. So let me grab this one. Okay. All right. This is his latest mugshot. So just because defendants agree to waive their right to appeal, doesn't mean that they can't still appeal. So a lot of you guys have been asking me about this in the comment section. And so according to Fox News, it's unlikely that Bryan Kohberger will appeal because he does have a lot to lose. If the court finds that Bryan Kohberger's appeal violated their plea agreement, then the state can reopen the case and the trial moves forward. So if he were to file an appeal and it was in violation of their plea agreement, then all bets are off. Capital punishment comes back on the table, and we're back to where we were before, which he can stand trial for doing away with this. And in addition to that, the courts will have the information that he already pled guilty to all of these crimes. So the likelihood of him doing well in a trial at this point is not great. He probably would be found guilty. And I think in light of the fact that he has pled guilty to doing away with Kaylee, Maddie, Ethan, and Xana and burglarizing the house, I think that it's, reasonable to expect that a jury probably would impose capital punishment. So the Supreme Court ruled that defendants can appeal on grounds outside of a plea agreement, but these instances are limited, and it's difficult to contemplate or think about what would be outside of the scope. This is according to an attorney named Eldridge from Fox News. Now, typically, when defendants appeal, if they've waived their right to appeal, the prosecution will hold up the plea agreement and the courts will decline it. But if Bryan Kohberger did this after he signed explaining that he would not appeal, he would put himself in jeopardy. So I want to talk about the fact that it appears that Kaylee had a stalker, and then we're going to talk about the real reason for those 2 Indiana traffic stops. Are they related to Bryan Kohberger's injury? And then we're going to discuss how WSU failed its students and Bryan Kohberger spying on police in the weeks leading up to the crimes. So one of the victims said that Kaylee told her roommates that she saw a man she didn't recognize staring at her when she took Murphy the dog. That was the dog that Kaylee and Jack owned together outside at the 1122 King Road home. And this was Bethany Funk. And another time they came home to find the door open, loose on its hinges. And this is what I believe. We heard that Xana's father was making some kind of an adjustment to the doors in the days leading up to the crimes. I believe that this is what he was repairing. The home was open, it was loose on its hinges, and they grabbed golf clubs to arm themselves against a possible intruder. So let's talk about the injuries on Bryan Kohberger, and was this the real reason that he was pulled over with his dad? Okay, so we know that BK was seen with injuries after the November 13th. According to another teaching assistant who worked with him at WSU, this person noticed injuries, according to documents, around October and November of 2022 and after the November 13th crime. Bryan Kohberger had injuries, including a scratch on his face and knuckle wounds. And the teaching assistant told law enforcement that this lines up, right, with that thumbs up photo that I enhanced for you guys, where we could see swollen knuckles, and then we saw the 2 blisters on the inside of his thumb. So when asked about his injuries, BK told his coworker at WSU that he had been in a car accident. And of course, we know there was no car accident involving Bryan Kohberger and that Hyundai Elantra. So in a supplemental narrative, the officer summarized the files that he received containing meeting notes about a meeting that Kohberger had with an unnamed professor and text messages between the professors at the school. So it sounds like WSU, again, they knew there was something terribly wrong with Bryan Kohberger. And instead of going back to HR and having HR make phone calls to everybody on his resume, all his former bosses, because he did inflate and change dates on his resume. So they could have removed him for lying on his resume, but they did not do this. So in my opinion, I believe that this is another instance where WSU could have taken action and maybe prevented this from occurring in that area. I do think he would have done this, though, somewhere else. So let's talk about this intervention that the WSU professors were texting about. So this is what they texted. Quote, "Do you want to take Kohberger? He listed you," and it's redacted, "as people he was interested in working with him." That's what one text said. "If I must," the other professor replied. Another thread message, so this is a different one, showed professors discussing the need to have an intervention with BK, saying that he had been offending female students and information is being gathered about the situation. Now, we knew that Bryan Kohberger was having trouble with females, but we didn't know how aware the professors were about it, the teachers were at WSU. And so these text messages, tell me that they were aware, but they did not remove him. So we knew that he had problems with women. This surfaced earlier. Sources told Chris Cuomo on News Nation back in 2023 that BK was known for misogyny and poor treatment of female students. We had heard that he was grading female students differently than the male students. And they said that BK talked down to women in the classes where he was a teaching assistant, and that he was ultimately fired. Now, he wasn't let go, according to WSU, until December 19th. And I do believe the current law enforcement chief of police for WSU is the former Pullman, Washington police chief. So we know now from him in the interview that he gave that Chief Fry from Moscow PD did tip him off when they identified Bryan Kohberger as a suspect. And now he's over at WSU, and that was on December 19th, right? WSU, that Bryan Kohberger was identified, and that's the same day that WSU let him go. I believe they were tipped off by the guy who's now their chief of police. But wait, it gets worse. So Bryan Kohberger had several encounters with local police due to traffic infractions, but no record of any kind of collision that would have, at all, even not even a bumper hit, nothing that would have caused him to have scratches and knuckle injuries. But the teacher assistant continued describe Bryan Kohberger as intelligent but selfish, and he claimed that Bryan Kohberger would mislead other people about shared assignments and leave people to complete work that was meant for Kohberger. So he wasn't even doing his job when he was there. Not only was he harassing female students, following them out to their cars, but he wasn't even doing his job while he was there. So there were so many reasons that WSU could have found an excuse to get rid of Bryan Kohberger. And I know they have to lay the groundwork, but having HR go back and just do what should have been done, in my opinion, initially, which is check all of his references and make sure every date is correct, would have been a very quick and easy way to get rid of him. They chose not to. And here we are. So he added that following the November 13th murders of Kaylee, Maddie, Ethan, and Xana, that BK started talking much more than usual about his conversations. And he felt like those were from someone who, quote, wanted to vent. So let's talk about BK's strange behavior at WSU, and then we're going to talk about how Bryan Kohberger spied on police. So WSU said that he also said that BK had talked about wanting a girlfriend. Okay, now remember, he had this WSU female student that she saw herself for the first time in the Dateline NBC special on the Idaho case. Imagine you're watching TV on Dateline and you see pictures of yourself on Dateline. That's how she found out she was on Bryan Kohberger's phone. But they said that BK often talked about wanting a girlfriend, and they talked about this topic on many occasions, and that the colleague told police that he believed that BK attempted to use his authority as a teaching assistant to inappropriately interact with female students. So this confirms what we had heard about him following women out to their cars. So let's talk about how Bryan Kohberger spied on police, and then we're going to talk about new information on Kaylee's stalker and what BK told police when he was arrested. So according to Fox News, Bryan Kohberger appeared to spy on police the night of the crimes. He searched for a police scanner website to listen to the Pullman Police Department's radio calls, you guys, in the wee hours of the morning of November 13th of 2022. So what was he listening for? And why not be listening to the Moscow Police Department radio calls? Why was he listening to Pullman? So browser records from his phone showed, according to the Moscow Police Department, that law enforcement found a search in BK's Chrome history showing he did a Google search for, quote, broadcastify.com/listen feed. That is the Pullman Police and Fire Dispatch live audio feed. And he did this at 12:26:49 a.m. Now, it is possible, because we know that Bryan Kohberger applied for a job at Pullman, Washington, to teach police how to use technology to solve crimes. And, we've learned that Bryan Kohberger, they could not find any evidence that Bryan Kohberger was Papa Roger. Does this mean he was Papa Roger? I don't know. It just means they couldn't find it. He scrubbed his electronics. It could also be that he was listening to the Moscow Police Department. We just won't know. And it could be that he just didn't delete this search, but he deleted the Moscow Police Department police scanner search that night, that he could have been doing that as well. We know he tried to delete his Amazon searches. We know that, they said that his electronics were practically scrubbed clean. So let's talk about more information on Kaylee's stalker. And then we're going to talk about what Bryan Kohberger discussed with police in just a moment. So please stay with me. But let's talk about the stalker. So Bethany Funk, as I just shared with you, is one of the 2 roommates that survived Bryan Kohberger. And in the interviews after November 13th, she told police that a month earlier, Kaylee had taken Murphy the dog outside and they saw this unknown male above their house to the south. So it sounds like he was standing where we believed he was parking, right? In that back parking lot behind the 1122 King Road home. And it was so concerning that Kaylee told everyone about it and called her roommates to ask if they would be home. So this is according to Bethany Funk. So it does appear, in my opinion, that probably was Bryan Kohberger. It could be that there was another guy, hanging around the 1122 King Road home, but I find it unlikely. Let me know what you think. So let's talk about what Bryan Kohberger told police. So when he was arrested in his parents' Albrightsville, Pennsylvania home, let me put this back up. This is his mugshot. About 6 weeks after the November 13th crimes, he was taken into. So he was arrested, we know, on December 30th, right? And he was taken to police state barracks. We know that they came in, they zip tied his family, which is standard procedure. They zip tied him, and then they took him to state police barracks to be interviewed by police from the Moscow Police Department, Idaho State Police, and the FBI. So 3 different branches of law enforcement were all there to be interviewed. Now they chatted about the WSU football team. They were trying to probably warm him up a little bit, ease him into stuff. They talked about BK's doctorate studies in criminal justice, his required duties to be a teaching assistant while in college, and why he wanted to become a professor. So it definitely seems like they were just trying to get him talking. And BK eventually said he understood they were engaging in small talk, but he would appreciate it if the officers would explain what they wanted. And one detective told him it was because of what happened in Moscow, Idaho, and asked if he knew, because remember, he was arrested in Pennsylvania, and asked if he knew what had transpired. And Bryan Kohberger says, of course. And then they asked, do you want to talk about it? And he immediately says, well, I think I would need a lawyer. He continued talking, though, asking. So this is, in my opinion, Bryan Kohberger trying to find out what law enforcement knew about him. So he didn't offer any information. He immediately said he thought he needed a lawyer. But he did ask some specific questions, and also wanted to know if his parents and his family dog was okay following his arrest. So BK finally did say again that he did want to speak to an attorney, and the police ended the interview because he invoked his Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate himself. So let me know what you think about all of this in the comment section below. I'm going to be talking about Chris Watts next, and Lily and Jack Sullivan, the 2 missing little ones from Canada. So let's talk about just some updates, some general updates on this case. Bryan Kohberger was described as being dishonest. A Moscow Police Department officer wrote in the police documents about meeting with a teacher's assistant, and the teacher's assistant went by the letter L, and they characterized BK as a dishonest person. To support this, L stated that he spoke with BK in late December of 2022, and that BK said he was packing his bags to catch a flight back to Washington. So I think that's interesting that he's telling his coworker that he's a fellow teaching assistant, that he's flying back to Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. But yet we have this trip that Michael Kohberger bought his plane ticket for on December the 10th and flew out, and they left December 13th before Bryan Kohberger was even done with his teaching assistant duties. Remember, one of his jobs as teacher's assistant would be to help administer final exams, which were that week. They weren't over when he and his dad left on the 13th. This is why I think that Bryan Kohberger did not show up at the hearing. I think he was really worried that he was going to get called out. for this road trip that he took. So the teaching assistant, later learned that BK had been back in Pennsylvania for some time and had driven the white Hyundai Elantra back with his father. So why did Bryan Kohberger lie to his former coworker, or it was his current at the time, and say he caught a flight? Did he not want people to know that he and his father were planning to drive that white Hyundai Elantra back to Albrightsville, Pennsylvania again? So I'm not, I know, we also learned that multiple people had the code to the 1122 King Road home. And this is really heartbreaking. We know that there were images of the house online on a very big realtor site. So I think it would have been easy for somebody to go there at Bryan Kohberger to look and see the layout of the house. It's also possible, when they found the door off the hinges, that he had gone into the house. Remember, he broke into his WSU colleague's house, the one woman he shared an office with, using her key. So if he didn't have a key and didn't have a code, is that why he took the door off the hinges? Allegedly, in my opinion. So the report says that that law enforcement did find out that a number of people did have the code to get into the 1122 King Road home. It said that Dee did add that Kaylee would often call him on occasions, and when she was walking alone or when she felt sketched out. Dee stated that there were people coming in and out of the 1122 King Road home frequently, and more people knew the code to the door than should have. And I think Dee is probably Dylan. Dee stated, oh no, it's a male, that he was not sure if residents regularly locked the rear sliding door. We've had a lot of people wonder if that rear patio door was locked or not, but we don't know, and we probably never will know. But popping that slider would have been so easy if they didn't have a burglar bar. The cheapest way to protect yourself with a patio door is to get a dowel and use it as a burglar bar to keep somebody from being able to pop that door open while you're sleeping. But it is possible that he could have popped it that night, or it could have been left open. So we're let's talk about what two of BK's inmates had to say about him. One called him an effing weirdo, and police said that they were being held at the same facility as BK. One officer wrote an inmate in the same facility as Kohberger said he was an effing weirdo and said he wasn't worried about legal repercussions and he would have physically assaulted BK. Said, quote, this is what the inmate said. When asked if he thinks that BK is guilty, the inmate said his Kohberger's eyes tell a story. And so many people have talked about how, creepy he is, from the female students at WSU to the 3 female students at University of Idaho, where he was hanging out in the student union in the canteen, sipping water, staring them down. When asked if he thought that Bryan Kohberger did it, the inmate said that his eyes told the story. Now, a second inmate of Bryan Kohberger also talked about his annoying habits, which we already discussed, which is just him washing his hands, staying up all night. And I do believe that his circadian rhythm was off. I think he was, awake all night because he was hunting, right? He was hunting for his next victim and hunting. Now, we don't know still what his motive is, and the prosecution would not have needed to prove it. But I think we can say that the target probably was either Kaylee or Maddie, because he made a beeline up the stairs when he got into the house on November 13th. So a responding officer described how they believe Bryan Kohberger got into the house, writing, quote, the footsteps went to and from the rear sliding door. So this is what we've always thought, right? He said, I observed the trail of footsteps from where the slider turned right and around a stump in the backyard that lead toward the front of the house. He said, I observed, this is the responding officer, a set of small handprints on the window to the east of the slider. The screen to this window appeared damaged and was lying on the ground. So the slider screen was damaged, so probably he took it off. And he located smudged fingerprints on the sliding glass door. There was a discarded black backpack in the backyard. Now, here's my opinion on the fingerprints. I do not think that these match Bryan Kohberger. I believe that he was wearing his hair in a hairnet, a balaclava mask, that he was wearing a fiber-free coverall monkey suit, jumpsuit type of, just like he described in his how-to essay that he wrote when he was at DeSales University in Pennsylvania getting his master's degree. And I believe that he would have worn at least one, maybe two pairs of gloves. So I don't believe that the fingerprints that were observed were Bryan Kohberger. We also have learned now that Kaylee may have called out. Moscow Police Department officer Mitch Nunes wrote in an incident report that a person whose name was redacted reported hearing a scream from who they believed was Kaylee at around 4 a.m. Now, this is interesting because the doorbell cam that picked up barking did not pick this up. So I don't know if it was, may not have been related to the house. This is a college town, so it just could have been off in the distance. But they told law enforcement that they heard a voice and that they thought they heard that Kaylee was running from the third floor down to the second floor. Now, again, I don't think this was Kaylee running. I think this may have been Xana. Remember, the police, the prosecutor, Bill Thompson, said that he believes that Xana started to go up the stairs. She would have brought her DoorDash, somehow ended up back on the kitchen sink, right? And I believe that BK would have left the patio doors open. He wouldn't have closed them to minimize his contact. Remember, low cards principle tells us that every contact leaves a trace. So he would have wanted to leave the most minimal amount of trace possible. So I don't believe he closed that door behind him. He also would have left it open to get out quickly in case he had to run. Remember, he was checking the police scanner, at least for Pullman. He may have checked it for Moscow also and just scrubbed that part of his electronic. I don't know. But Officer Mitch Nunes said that someone thought they heard Kaylee running from the third floor down to the second. The person said they locked themselves into bedrooms. This would have been Dylan. And after a commotion, peeked out and observed a man 5'10" or taller, dressed all in black, who was athletic but not muscular, wearing a balaclava ski mask, leaving through the second floor patio area. She said, quote, eventually she stopped hearing a struggle and heard a male voice say, "You're going to be fine. I'm going to help you." And this is why this was kicked up to a capital case, because he did not have to go in and he didn't have to go into the house at all. But the fact that he was like pretending he wanted to help and then did what he did to Xana and Ethan is just diabolical. The person said that they did not recognize the male voice. I am not going. So did Bryan Kohberger and the victims have a connection? We've heard so many rumors about this. Now, investigators said that they could not find a connection between Bryan Kohberger and the victims. And this is surprising because we know from the Dateline NBC that he had photos of their friends on his phone. And we had heard from Steve and Christy Gonzalez that they both had seen him following Maddie, that he had liked Maddie's photos more, but heard some with Kaylee and Maddie together too. And Shadow Dragon also reported that BK was following Maddie and Kaylee on Instagram. So it'll be interesting to see if the FBI and Idaho State Police come out with more information on this, of whether he was actually had connections to the victim or not. I do think that law enforcement or that the prosecution should have asked Bryan Kohberger, in my opinion, where the knife and the clothes were that he wore that night. I do think that it would be helpful to have those. And we still do not know with 100% certainty who the target was. We're going to talk more about the roommates in just a second. Let me just check in with chat. I want to do a poll. If you believe that Bryan Kohberger checked the police scanners for the Moscow Police Department and just managed to successfully erase that off of his electronics, put a 1 in the chat. If you believe that Bryan Kohberger only checked the Pullman Police Department at around 12, a little after midnight, on November 13th of 2020, 2022, put 8-2 in the chat. I'm just curious where you guys are at on this. So we got ones, a lot of ones. Whoop, this just skipped. All right, so we got a lot of ones. Wow. Thanks for modding today, Barbara. Thanks for modding today, Injaz. A lot of ones. Thanks for modding today, Susan. Helga thinks it's a 2. A lot of ones. Mike said, just horrible. The more I think about it, the more unreal it is. How can anyone be that evil to do this to innocent strangers? How could he think this was something to be proud of? Yeah, thanks. I don't know. Thanks, Donna, for modding today. 2, 1, 1. Sandra said, just noted Amazon sells cut-proof gloves. They're chainmail gloves. This could explain why he didn't have cuts on his hand. I mean, I don't know. We don't have any evidence that he purchased those, but it's possible. 1. Dunya says both, that she thinks he checked both. Calgal said, didn't Ramsland notice how weird BK was? Nope. The SK expert did not notice that he was weird. She thought he was one of her best students. Nobody at DeSales did. They recommended him to go on to WSU. Patricia thinks it's both. Hi, Jojo. Barbara says, good evening, everyone. Please give this a thumbs up on your way in and subscribe. It's free. D says 1, 2. Dredge says, I believe he has done this before. Shelley says 1. Teresa says, Ramsland said he was typical or something to that effect. And Wicked says 2, only because Moscow's 911 goes through to Pullman. Oh, so you think that he checked the Pullman police scanner because the 911 call would have gone through to Washington. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that, Wicked. That makes sense. Helga said, I don't believe he would have been able to successfully delete it. I think he was being sneaky by checking Pullman's, not Moscow's. Very interesting. Well, I think he could have scrubbed his search histories, but D thinks he checked both. 1. Mike says, thanks for modding today. The thumbs up is that he thinks he won a fair battle. You're talking about that infamous thumbs up selfie that he took. Yeah, that was really creepy. Checking Moscow's scanner would have been a big red flag that would stick out. And remember, the 911 calls would have been routed to Washington, so maybe that's why. That makes a lot of sense. Barb says, I honestly believe he scrubbed his devices to keep the agents from finding out he was Papa Roger. Jet says that's an interesting comment, Wicked, that it's possible that the Moscow 911 calls goes through to Pullman Dispatch. And we know that they were having financial issues, right? And we thought originally maybe that's why it was reported as a unconscious person, because it was their protocol at the time that if they had multiple people on the phone, that it would be reported as a unconscious person. We have now learned that that is not the case, that Hunter just did not want to tell the girls what he saw. And so it was reported as unconscious person. Great comments, you guys. Thanks for modding today, Donna and Michael. Shelley said, I thought the hands on the one side of the selfie looked swollen. Let me see if I can grab that really easily. Let's take a look. I don't know if I have that one handy or not. I have been switching over to another computer. So I have my external hard drives clicked over onto that one. Yeah, I don't have that. I do want to show you this, though. You probably have already seen this, but so a lot of people have been wondering about these L's that are on Bryan Kohberger's shirt that were during the hearing. There was a lot of people wondering. This is him, but this is from the hearing. They did a close-up, and you could see right on either side there's an L. Okay, so a lot of people wondered if that was like something, diabolical or something like that. But a former inmate named Jumpsuit Pablo said that this was just the size that he wore. He wore a large, and that this is evidenced right here. You can see that he's not in court and he's still got the L's on his shirt. And that's for his mugshot, which was taken from when he was not going to the new prison. So just wanted to share that. And then a lot of people have talked about this black heart that he drew. So he drew this black heart while he was sitting there at the table. He had this with him. I just want to show that. Okay, so there it is. And he reportedly gave this to Ann Taylor. That must have made her feel really good to get that. Really a creepy souvenir. And I think the black heart pretty much sums up Bryan Kohberger, in my opinion. Let me know if you have a different take on it. But it certainly seems like very, very creepy. Very, very creepy guy. So it does sound like there was a scream that night. So we'll have to wait and see what we learn when we get more document drops, not just from the Moscow Police Department, but also the Pullman Police Department and also WSU. They have a police department as well, and the Idaho State Police. And I don't think the FBI is going to probably give us a whole lot. So let me pull this up. Let me take this down. So this is the discussed intervention for Bryan Kohberger. And I do think that it's, they knew that he was having problems. And my sourcing on this is News Nation. But the fact that they didn't take any kind of action, even though they knew he was having all these problems, I think is very, very creepy. So let's go through the 4 things that we learned about Bryan Kohberger from the unsealed documents, the 4 biggest takeaways. I know there's lots of takeaways, but going through the main ones, I do want to just say, before we do that, I do want to, we're not done. We still have to go through that, but I do want to say thank you to our producers, NJazz, Sasha Angel, George Brown, Christy Ballantyne, Michael Cole, and Lynn Jen 2. And thank you to our channel members. These are members that hit the join button, which is next to the subscribe button, if you would like to have your name appear just like this. And after today's live stream on the Bryan Kohberger, we're going to talk about Chris Watts, and then we're going to do a live stream on Lily and Jack Sullivan. I have some updates for you guys in that case as well. So thank you to all of our channel members for your kind and caring support. I update this one day before every live stream. So if you join, your name will appear during our next live stream, which will be on Saturday for this case, unless we have some more breaking news, in which case I will go live sooner. But I do want to talk about our 4 biggest takeaways in this case. And I do want to say thank you so much for super thanks and coffee gratitude from the hearing that we had, and also a big shout out for gifted channel memberships. Thank you so much. All right, so let's do our 4 biggest takeaways. And I do want to, NJazz became a producer. I think you were a producer already. So thank you so much for continuing to be a producer of Reporter Room. I'm really grateful. NJazz is our head mod, along with Michael Cole is our other head mod. And Michael, thank you so much for your $1.99 super sticker. I have already used it to purchase a camera. You're going to see me with a new camera. I was trying to get it set up yesterday, but we lost power. We had somebody ran into a pole and took out power for our community. I want to thank My Missing Piece for being a Reporter Room channel member for 14 months. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, NJazz, for the gifted Reporter Room membership. If you receive that, please make sure you tell NJazz thank you. And thank you so much, NJazz. And she gifted another Reporter Room membership. So if you're watching, come on up and talk to me. And Nick, thank you so much for your $5 super sticker. Nick says, late to the party, Mike donation from my birds and myself. To be honest, I don't care what the police claim. BK was an SK, just got caught first. A lot of people feel like the Dana Smithers, even though they, said there wasn't anything, that this, could be related. I don't know. Yeah, Jojo's right. There's always a way to delete your info from a crime scene. Dana says he didn't draw it sitting there. He was in cuffs. The pen on the table is part of the photocopy. This was a card or something from someone, I think. I think I think he drew it. And the L looks like Laverne and Shirley. That's what Sue Joy thinks. Okay. And Zoo says, Kohbergers think BK is some kind of normal guy. Yeah. All right. So let's go through the 4 biggest takeaways together. So the four things we learned about the Idaho case, Bryan Kohberger, from the unsealed documents. First, we learned about Kaylee and Xana, that I'm really gonna watch my words here, that they got the worst of it, and I believe it's because Kaylee and Xana did fight back. And we had already heard from Steve that how bad it was, and so a lot of people are saying that had the surviving roommates called 911 sooner, but we've heard that Ethan, it was his jugular and subclavian veins. These right here. I think he went for this area first, which would have made it harder for them to scream. It would have, and it would not, in my opinion, just reading through everything, and I'm not going to read it out to you because it is so disturbing. But I don't think they were survivable. Not with how many times he used that K-bar knife. It just wasn't. So we know that the surviving roommates did not call 911. And now we have learned that Dylan told police that she did hear a scream on the night that she believed came from Kaylee. So I don't know why they didn't, but what she said, and this is what we heard from Steve Gonzalez too. They said that they would play jokes on them, and she said that she told Bethany that night. Then Bethany said that they thought it might have been a member of the University of Fraternity playing a joke on them. So we had heard from Steve Gonzalez that they thought maybe this was like some kind of a joke, so they weren't for sure that it was real. And I also shared with you that with the body cam footage of Xana coming out and talking to police when law enforcement was responding to a noise complaint, and she was telling them she was trying to go to sleep, she was only 20, that they said that if they had to come back out to the house, they were going to issue a ticket, which could have hurt Kaylee and Maddie's chances to graduate. So I think all of these things were weighing in their mind. And that combined with youth and being intoxicated, they didn't call 911. But even if they had, I do not believe these wounds were survivable. We learned also that the fellow inmates found BK as being weird. We heard this from Monroe, Pennsylvania, when Bryan Kohberger was arrested, and he was taken to the jail in Pennsylvania, was waiting to be extradited. We heard an inmate say that he was taunting the guards, that he was being kind of weird. And now we're hearing from fellow inmates at the Latah County Jail, we haven't heard from Ada County yet, that they also thought he was weird. They said, washing his hands all the time, pacing back and forth in his cell at night when everybody else is trying to sleep, that he was creepy. And now we also learned the fourth takeaway is that Bryan Kohberger was seen with injuries after the crime. And I believe that this is the reason that he and his father were stopped not once but twice. I had heard at the time of the traffic stop that they were trying to get body cam footage of any potential injuries. Let me pull that one up. And I do believe, and I enhanced these in another video if you want to go through my playlist, but we noticed him pulling his sleeves down in the traffic stop video. And I do believe there is a cut here on his wrist that he would have been able to cover up with sleeves. Remember, in the thumbs up selfie, he had on long sleeves and his shirt was completely buttoned up. So I think that's, how he went around, in my opinion. But we learned that that he had injuries, including a scratch on his face. And this lines up with what we heard, which was that Maddie had DNA under her fingernails. Now, the defense did not want this to be admitted. They said that, it could have been from somebody else. And the prosecution did want to admit it. We never found out what the likelihood ratio is that it was Bryan Kohberger, but obviously it wasn't 0. Because if it was 0, Ann Taylor would have wanted it to be admitted. The judge ultimately ruled that he was not going to let it in. So we still don't know what the likelihood ratio under Maddie's fingernails, the DNA, what percentage, what was that matched up to Bryan Kohberger. It wasn't like the knife sheath DNA with the cheek swab where it was in the octillion range. It was just a likelihood ratio that, didn't exclude him. So we'll have to see. But now we know that he did have injuries, and that they were big enough that he told his classmate that he had had a car accident. So we also learned that Bryan Kohberger's behavior began shifting dramatically, and that investigators would later find out that he had fixated on news coverage about the 1122 King Road crime, and he began paying for things in cash, often wearing gloves. So I guess my question was he wearing gloves before the crimes? We know from the 2 traffic stops, from his dad's trip with him from Albrightsville to Pullman, he wasn't wearing gloves in the car for that. He wasn't wearing gloves on his traffic stops when he got pulled over for pulling into the crosswalk. So, why was he wearing gloves after the crime scene? Now we know he did it. He was worried. He knew he left that knife sheath behind, in my opinion. So details emerge that on Friday, let me make sure I'm sharing this with you. Let me take this down, put this up. There we go. Okay. So details emerged, and my sourcing on this is the East Idaho News. That he was avoiding the area of the 1122 King Road home. So we always wonder, did he still like to take late drives around the Idaho house, the 1122 King Road home, or did it all just stop? Well, now we have our answer, that he was paying items for cash. He was often wearing gloves, and he avoided the area of the crimes. So the late night drives to the 1122 King Road home stopped after the crimes were committed. Details emerged with CNN regarding a sit-down interview that they did with Idaho State Police Lieutenant Darren Gilbertson and the Moscow Police Chief Anthony Dollinger. Now, the investigators shared a new insight into BK's unusual behavior and the violent struggles that took place inside the 1122 King Road home. They said everything lined up for investigators once they started looking into Kohberger as a suspect. This is what he told CNN. And by the time the FBI linked Bryan Kohberger to the DNA found on the knife sheath left at the scene, the investigation had dragged on for several weeks with thousands of tips pouring in, he said, and that Kohberger's name seemed to click everything into place. And we now know that he did it. He pled guilty. He signed a confession. He was sentenced to life in prison as part of a plea deal, which half the families were in favor of and half the families were not in favor of. And though Gilbertson said that though Kohberger had returned to the area a few hours after the crime, so that would have been just after 9 a.m. on November 13th, investigators said they believe he never set foot in Moscow again after that. So the long-awaited question that we wondered, that as a jury we would want to know, is did his love for late night drives into Moscow, Idaho, continue after the crimes were committed? No, they did not. They all stopped. So we also found out some other interesting revelations. He was following news of the crimes. It would take investigators nearly 2 months to arrest him at his parents' Albrightsville, Pennsylvania home, and he was busy taking what they characterized as strange precautions. Gilbertson said that he stopped using his debit card, his credit cards. He started using only cash. And he said in video and surveillance that we would collect and pick up after that, he's often wearing gloves. So the glove wearing we did not see in the traffic stop where he pulled into a crosswalk. We didn't see it on his road trek with his dad driving his car, but he was wearing gloves when he was out in public. That he was often wearing gloves, and we don't hear any mention from his coworkers about him wearing gloves. So why was he wearing gloves? I think it's because he knew his DNA was on the knife sheath. I think he was getting paranoid. he was getting weird. I think he always was weird, but he was getting like weirded out. So before law enforcement seized his electronic devices, Kohberger had been wiping data from them. And this is why I say we have to be careful how we report this out. We can say that they did not have evidence that Bryan Kohberger was Papa Roger. But we can also say that he was wiping his data and that he was going to teach technology. That's what he applied for with the job at Pullman, Washington, had he been hired to teach technology to law enforcement, that he would have been good at being able to scrub his data from them. So I just say my thought is that I think he was following Kaylee and Maddie. I think he probably did go to the Mad Greek. We've heard from a former employee that said he was there, but the owner denied it. But now we know for sure that he had been wiping data from his electronic devices. So he was scrubbing. Remember, he tried to delete his Amazon searches too. It just didn't work. Even so, he kept several screenshots and pictures of the news coverage of the crimes, according to Gilbertson. However, investigators found no evidence on the devices that BK had known the victims. So just because it's not there doesn't mean there wasn't. It just means they couldn't find it because he had been wiping data. Gilbertson said debunking reports that BK had photos and social media accounts of some of the victims on his phone. Well, I don't know if this debunks it or not. I guess it does debunk that he had photos of the victims on his phone. We did hear that. We did believe that he had victims. So they said, to this date, we have never found a single connection, anything between any of the 4 victims or the 2 surviving roommates. No pictures, no texts. So BK pled guilty this month. We know that. And we know this did really upset the Cardodals and the Gonzalveses, who did really want to see the ultimate penalty be imposed on Bryan Kohberger. Now, the sentencing allowed the police to release this trove of investigative documents and to provide some answers to the crimes. And Gilbert and Dollinger, who are with the Moscow Police Department, agreed that one question that maybe never be answered is, why did he do it? And again, the prosecution would not have had to have provided a motive. It just, I think, everybody wants to know, why. But if Bryan Kohberger did come forward and tell us why he did it at this point, he's told so many, he's been so dishonest. He was even characterized as being dishonest by his teaching assistant. But what law enforcement believes is that BK was very consumed with criminology and the psychology in relation to crimes like this. We know that he studied Elliot Rodger. We still don't know what the page that was underlined that was found with Bryan Kohberger stuff at his parents' Albrightsville home. Love to know if that's the Elliot Rodger Day of Retribution. That to me would, give us some clues. We know that, and we had heard from Steve Gonzalez that Kaylee had fought back. And then we also know that, and we had heard this early on as well, that Kaylee had expressed fears that she was being followed, and that investigators said that this elicited hundreds of tips and pieces of information about her having a stalker. And he confirmed that her fears were correct. He said somebody had followed her, and we know Kaylee absolutely felt it was real. We investigated that heavily. We tracked down every bit of it. Fortunately, it was not what we would term or think of as stalking. So someone had followed Kaylee, but never contacted her again. He said it ended up being an instance where somebody saw a very pretty girl and was hoping to be able to talk to her or maybe get a date or something. So that's interesting. They said that they had identified an instance in October where 2 men were seen at a business and 1 man appeared to follow Kaylee inside as she exited to her car. The man did not make contact with her. They contacted both men and learned that they were trying to meet women at the business, and that detectives said they believed that this was, it was, and that they believe this was not just an isolated one-time incident, that they were just trying to hit on Kaylee, basically. It was not a pattern of stalking. And there's no evidence that either of these men did anything to Kaylee or were involved in this crime. I do believe though, that this is what Ann Taylor was going to present. Remember, just before she and Bryan Kohberger took this plea deal, they were prepared to implicate 4 innocent men in the crimes that Bryan Kohberger pled guilty to. I know there are some people, very small percentage, just like in the Chris Watts case, that no matter what evidence is presented, including the fact that Bryan Kohberger signed a confession, including that he pled guilty, including that his late night drives to the 1122 King Road home stopped, including the fact that he had bruising on his knuckles and scratches on his face, that no matter what you tell them, they will never believe it. And I think maybe this is why the prosecution felt they had to settle, because all Ann Taylor needed was one juror to get a hung jury. Deception said, I've seen people speculate why it's the 1122 King Road house, 11 of 22. Yeah, could be. I believe that the 11 and the 13th date which was November 13th, which was the day of retribution that Elliot Rodger talked about on the page that happens to be the same page, that number that BK lined up with, and that the 1122 also would have fit. A lot of people believe that the reason he chose Papa Rodger and used that avatar, of that not only just looked like him. Let me see if I have that handy. Yeah, I do. Not only looked like him, but also, was a Russian soldier. And they said that Moscow, Idaho, and Moscow, Russia, the spelling is the same. And they thought that maybe that's why. So, a lot of people feel like, he was a smart guy, that he had put a lot of different things together. He not only chose an avatar that looked like him, he chose a soldier, which is something we know he, wanted to be in law enforcement. He had been removed from a military-like program in his high school for being, in my opinion, weird to females. Crypto says, agreed, he was Papa Rodger. No way a random person had a profile picture that looked just like Bryan Kohberger. Lenny said he was not Papa Rodgers, as confirmed by the FBI. They did not say. I just want to make sure we have this correct. And I don't want to single anybody out, but not being able to find evidence of is different than there never, he didn't, that then we were able to confirm it absolutely wasn't him because it was someone else. Like Kaylee Stalker being able to know that that was actually someone else. They were able to confirm that. Okay. But with Papa Rodger, we don't know. He scrubbed his electronics. We know that. We will never know if he was Papa Rodger unless he tells us. But law enforcement did not say he was absolutely not Papa Rodger. They said they did not, because if they knew it was somebody else, they would have said, we know he was not Papa Rodger because it was someone else. They did not say that. What they did say was they couldn't find any evidence linking Bryan Kohberger to Papa Rodger, which is different. Does that mean he is Papa Rodger? I don't know. And I don't know if we ever will know. But I just want to make sure that we're reporting things out, that I'm reporting things out as accurately as possible. Thanks for modding today, Kathleen and Holly. Betsy says he wiped his computer several times. Oh, yeah. He knew how to do it. And Abigail believes he used a burner phone. We'll never know. We'll never know. Rodrigo said they did say it was not him. So I guess my question is, who was it? If you know for sure it wasn't him, then not you, Rodrigo, but who was it? So maybe we will find out more. Maybe Rodrigo's right and I'm wrong. Karen said if BK had done that to the door, he probably was trying to let it be known that they were being watched. Denise said, okay, I see the difference. They couldn't find any evidence of being Papa Rodgers. Yeah. And that's what I think too. I think not being able to find evidence that he is Papa Rodger. I know people are reporting it out. Bryan Kohberger was not Papa Rodger. What it says is that they weren't able to prove that it was him. Was it him? I don't know. Did they prove it was somebody else? Not that we've heard. So in my opinion, this is how I'm looking at it. And you can look at it however you want. This is a Critical Thinkers channel. My opinion on this is until they tell me that who this was, I'm always going to wonder if it was, could have been him. So That doesn't mean I'm right. This is just, that's where I'm at with it. Until they tell me this was somebody else, and we absolutely could prove that this was somebody else. Like they could prove that that Kaylee's stalker was actually someone else, that it was a man that approached her at the bar. This is the one that Ann Taylor wanted to put up as a alternative suspect, was somebody that approached her at a bar and, was basically hitting on her. Karma said, more people like this exist, so let's figure out a way to protect people. And Betsy says, no, they didn't even say they didn't. They said they can't find a link. Right. So not being able to find a link doesn't mean he is or isn't Papa Roger. It just means they couldn't find it. But they also tell us that he scrubbed his devices. So, not being able to find a link to Kaylee, Maddie, Ethan, or Xana doesn't mean there wasn't a link. It just means they could not find it. Mike says, exactly. Who was it then? They never said. Right. So we'll have to wait. There might be more information that comes. That's why I'm just like, we have to keep our minds open for new information. Thank you so much for modding today, and Jazz. Jackslin says his family was so obsessed with SKs. The mother the mother did write a shaming people who were happy that Ted Bundy had gone to the old Sparky in Florida. The chair that I don't know which one it is, but she wrote a letter. She wrote an article about kind of shaming people for being happy that he was being done away with. Like, what have we become? But it does make me wonder, what was going on at the dinner table in the Kohberger family. Michael says Papa Roger knew inside details of the crime. Yeah, he knew about the knife before we ever did, before the press made it, before the law enforcement made it public. Now, could it have been a law enforcement guy? It's possible too. Could have been somebody, posing as Papa Roger to try to lure him out. I don't know, but they didn't say he wasn't Papa Roger. They said they could not prove he was Papa Roger. That's not the same thing. Saying, I know it's not Papa Roger because we know it was somebody else. That, like the Kaylee stalker, wasn't Bryan Kohberger. They know it was somebody else. It was or at least the guy was, hitting on her. Now the guy standing behind the house, that's a different guy. So Wicked says, I heard the same thing Rodrigo did. I heard it reported out that way too. So I'm just going off of what I read. Helga Shabala Bang Ding Dong. That's so cute. I think it was his dad. You think what was his dad? Papa Roger? Oh, I don't think so. Kimmy says, I think it was. Teresa said, Papa Roger had these questions for the discussion group that seemed much like the test came off as superior. Yep. Until I see some information that tells me it wasn't, I'm probably going to always think it was. I want to say thank you to Donna for the $2.99 super sticker. Thank you so much, Donna. I put that toward the new camera, and I do have everything set up. I'm just now moving all my data from one computer over to the other. Quizagal, thank you so much for the $7.99 super sticker. That is so kind and generous of you. I really appreciate it. I'll be putting that toward the new camera. So thank you so much for that, you guys. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to be going over. We're going to talk about Chris Watts next, if you want to follow me over for that. And right after that, I'm going to be doing a live stream with updates on the Lily and Jack Sullivan case, the two little ones who disappeared out of their Nova Scotia, Canada home. So thank you so much for joining me. If you haven't subscribed already, well, it's free. Please consider subscribing. I can't get to 50,000 subscribers without your help. And I will see you. We'll be doing another Bryan Kohberger live stream in just a couple of days, maybe sooner, if there's breaking news.